Alrighty, welcome to SeraphShares, everybody. As many of you know, myself, Pastor Susie, and some of the other team members at GodSquadChurch went to an event called Inside Elevation towards the beginning of March. It was absolutely amazing, and I was planning on doing a SeraphShares pertaining to something we learned there while I was at Susie's, but then we got super busy with all the SquadCon stuff, and it just didn't happen. That's alright, but now I've repurposed that share that I was going to do into tonight's share. I'm going to be talking about checking your oil. And remember, we're not talking about cars. Alrighty, so I will say that this share is going to be a little bit more scripture focused than most are. I do try to keep SeraphShares fairly universal so that it can be a good encouragement to everyone and not just Christians. But when you go to a Christian leadership conference, it's hard to not have a very biblical interpretation of the wisdom that was shared with you. So, but if you're a Christian, you should still be able to get something out of this. Did I say if you're a Christian? I meant if you're not a Christian. I don't know if I said that right or not. But if you're not a Christian, hope you stick around. Should still be encouraging for you. So the first scripture that was used when Inside Elevation started was 2 Kings 4. And if you guys aren't familiar with the story, I'm going to sum it up for you. First thing you need to know is about this dude named Elisha, who is an Old Testament prophet and follower of God. Not to be confused with Elijah with a J, okay? They're two different people that I personally get mixed up all the time. But that's because I'm horrible with names. So, when you have Elisha and Elijah, and they're both Old Testament prophets, it's like, come on, really? You couldn't have named your children more different things? Anyway, we're talking about Elisha with an SH. All right. Now that we're clear on that, this widow comes to Elisha because she lost her husband, and she has a lot of debt that she can't pay. She's so in debt that a creditor is coming to take her 2 children to be slaves because she can't pay anything. So they're going to take her children to work as slaves. Awful. Think about how dreadful this must be for her, right? She's desperate right now. No mother wants to have her children taken away from her, but this woman has nothing left. She can't pay her debt. So she's coming to Elijah for anything. Think about the time period this is in, right? Where women didn't really work. So it isn't like she can just go get a job or something and start working to pay off her debt. If you were a woman and your husband died, it was kind of GG unless you had children that were old enough to support you and take care of you. So this widow comes to Elijah. She tells him her situation. And Elisha asks her 2 questions. How can he help? And what does she have? The woman answers that she has nothing except for a jar of oil. Except for a jar of oil. That's all she has. 1 jar of oil. So Elisha tells her, take that 1 jar of oil and pour it out into a bunch of other jars. So the woman goes and does just that. And she pours that 1 jar of oil into many other jars. And suddenly her 1 jar of oil, what she thought was not enough, what she thought wasn't important, it made a difference and it multiplied. And with all the oil, she was able to not only pay off her debt, but she had enough left over to live off of. What an awesome story, right? That was pretty much all there was to it. But there's so much to unpack here. More than the 10-minute time straight? I just made up a word. More than the 10-minute time constraint of SeraphShares will allow us to do. But what we're going to focus on tonight is the oil specifically. Very specifically before it was multiplied. So the widow didn't think much of it, right? Her phrasing is very important here, as she says, nothing. I have nothing except for a jar of oil. Her first instinct is that she has nothing. She has absolutely nothing. The oil is like an afterthought. Like she doesn't think much of it. In the moment, she doesn't see what the oil can do for her. Imagine if the story ended right after she said that. Imagine if, like her, we didn't know what was going to happen. Most of us wouldn't think much of a single jar of oil. Because it isn't much. It's not much. But it was that 1 jar that became so much more. in the end, did Elisha really do anything? All he did was tell her what to do. He didn't give her anything. He didn't do anything for her. All he did was tell her that the only thing that she had was enough. Something that she already had was the solution to her problems. When we find ourselves in these tough situations where it feels like there's nothing that we can do to fix it, sometimes the solution is something that we already have, whether it be physically or like a talent, or it could be anything, something that we already have. We just might not realize it. Now, some of you are thinking right now, Seraph, this woman had a miracle happen in her life. That jar of oil wouldn't have done anything if it wasn't for the miracle. That jar of oil would have been useless. And to you, I would say, do miracles not still happen? Hello? God can take what we have, and he can multiply it in ways that we never thought possible. He can take our resource, our oil, and he can do so much more with it than we ever could. And the resource doesn't have to be physical objects, like I was saying. Your talents, your ideas, your passions, God can take those things and blow your stinking mind by showing you what you can do with them. But when we discredit them, when we think they aren't enough, they lose their potential. All we have to do is let God show us what we can do with them. And you know what the best part about all this is? Is that we all have that little bit of oil that God is waiting to use if we'd only trust him. For some, it's a passion. Others, an idea. Maybe a talent. Maybe an object. God has given each of us our own unique jar of oil that has the potential to change the world. If you don't know what yours is, that's okay. Pray about it. And God he'll reveal it to you. He'll let you know. Some of you, though, have been discrediting your oil, myself included. Guys, remember, SeraphShares is what this may have come from a conference, but I'm talking about it because it really, really connected with me. Some of us discredit our oil. We think that it's not enough. Or maybe we tried using it, but it didn't go very far. Or maybe it worked, but not like we had thought it would. But do we ever stop and ask God what he could do with it? Have you ever tried something that didn't work, but then never asked God what he could have done with it? One more thing, going back to Elijah. In the end, it was God that told him what to say, and it was God that made the miracle happen. But God used Elisha to be the messenger. And maybe there's someone in your life, that's told you how to use your oil, and you thought nothing of it. Or maybe someone will see your oil in the future, and they'll tell you what you can do with it. But don't discredit somebody's suggestion just because it sounds crazy. If the widow had thought Elijah's suggestion was too crazy to try, and she just never even did it, she's like, okay, that's crazy. I'm not doing that. Goodbye, Elisha. Well, she wouldn't have been able to pay off her debt now, would she? But instead, God changed her life through that crazy suggestion. I encourage you guys to, check your oil regularly, just like you would do with a car. But this isn't cars, guys. It's a jar. It's metaphorical, okay? Metaphorically, check your oil, okay? All right. We got to be clear on that. But check your oil. See if there's a resource you've been writing off as not really worth it, or not worth to give another go. If you learned something completely different this past week, or the week that I was at Inside Elevation, if you learned something, and I wasn't here to do SeraphShares, let's hear about it. Let's hear what you guys have been learning as well. Share the wisdom. But I hope you guys enjoyed this installment of SeraphShares, and I do have a bit of an announcement. Hopefully it doesn't get too many of you to be like, what? But the next week's SeraphShares is going to be the season 2 finale. Now, as far as what that means for the future of SeraphShares, well, you're going to have to wait and see next week, because I'm not saying anything more than that next week is the season 2 finale. So be there for that. It's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. Going to have a great message. And then we're going to be talking about the future of SeraphShares going forward.